Ice may seem motionless, but sometimes it acts like a time capsule, capable of holding secrets for thousands of years. In Siberia, a baby mammoth remained perfectly preserved for approximately 42,000 years. In the Alps, a man over 5,000 years old appeared completely by chance. In Antarctica, a white glacier was releasing a strange red liquid that confused scientists. From ancient bodies to reactivated viruses, hidden treasures, lost routes, and military wreckage, these discoveries show that when the ice opens up, history comes back to the surface. And that's exactly what you're going to see here today. So go ahead and leave your like, click the subscribe button down below, and let's dive in. Lyuba was about 30 days old when she got stuck in the mud in Siberia. She was a baby woolly mammoth. What's truly shocking is what happened next. Instead of disappearing over time, she spent around 42,000 years preserved in the ice with her skin, trunk, and even internal details intact. She turned up in 2007 on the Yamal Peninsula. The one who found her was Yuri Kuti, a reindeer herder, but the discovery nearly fell apart right there. Due to his people's beliefs, Yuri didn't touch the body and went to get help. During that time, Lyuba was taken and sold to a trader in exchange for snowmobiles and supplies. When authorities managed to recover her, she was still in an impressive state, even though local dogs had taken one ear and part of her tail. From that point on, they had to be extremely careful. Lyuba had to stay below freezing, be wrapped up, and examined without destroying the body. In the CT scans, scientists saw bones, organs, and even remnants of mother's milk in her stomach. Inside the intestines, there was material that baby animals ingest to build the bacteria that help with digestion. It's a small detail, but almost impossible to spot in something this ancient. The most accepted explanation is that lactic acid-producing bacteria help naturally preserve the tissues. That's why Lyuba became one of the most important discoveries about woolly mammoths. She wasn't just a beautiful fossil, she was a piece of the Ice Age preserved inside and out. Wayusi spent more than 5,000 years under the ice. In 1991, two hikers accidentally discovered his body in the Ötztal Alps on the border between Austria and Italy. At first glance, it looked like someone who had recently suffered an accident in the mountains, but the analysis changed everything. That man had lived roughly around 3,300 BC, before the pyramids of Giza and before Stonehenge. Preservation was remarkably rare. The researchers managed to study his clothing, tools, and even traces of what he had eaten shortly before his death. He carried gear that suggested he was an expert on the mountain. Leather garments, arrows, fire-starting tools, and a surprisingly valuable copper axe, which at the time was a highly prestigious item. Dozens of tattoos also covered his body, many on areas linked to joint pain, possibly part of some ancient treatment. For a long time, it was a long-standing belief that he had simply frozen to death in an accident. But years later, scans found a flint arrowhead lodged in his left shoulder. From that point on, the story changed dramatically. Ötzi was likely struck and died soon after, and the fact that the valuable axe was left behind indicated this wasn't a simple robbery. Today, the mummy resides in the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, kept in a special cold chamber that mimics the glacial conditions. The man who seemed like a recent casualty of the mountain wound up becoming one of the oldest cases of violent death ever studied by science. When Australian geologist Thomas Griffith Taylor spotted that red stain in Antarctica back in 1911, the scene seemed out of place in that frozen landscape. A white glacier, under extreme cold, releasing a strange red liquid from a crack in the ice. For a long time, red algae was the prime suspect. But the answer was something else, and even more fascinating. Despite the nickname it's earned, that's obviously not blood. This so-called blood falls is actually extremely salty water loaded with iron seeping out of Taylor Glacier. When that water hits the air, the iron meets oxygen and oxidizes almost instantly. The red color is rust forming right there in the middle of the ice. The source of this flow is hidden beneath around 400 meters of ice, an isolated lake that's been sealed for at least 1.5 million years. Even with an average temperature near -17 degrees, the water keeps moving because it's a brine, meaning it's way saltier than seawater. And incredibly, that lake isn't empty. Researchers have found extremophile bacteria there, microscopic organisms capable of living in the dark without oxygen in conditions that would be fatal to almost everything else. That's why Bloodfalls has become a natural laboratory for understanding how life survives in extreme places, even on frozen worlds beyond Earth. La Doncella was about 15 years old when she was taken to the top of the Lulailaco volcano, on the border between Argentina and Chile. She was part of the Capacocha, an Inca ritual where chosen children were offered to the gods in exchange for protection, good harvests, or to mark important moments of the empire. Over 500 years later, in 1999, archaeologists climbed to more than 6,700 meters in altitude. Up there, they found the teenage girl sitting, wrapped in fabrics, perfectly preserved by the extreme cold. The impact wasn't just about finding an ancient mummy, it was seeing that she still looked incredibly close to a living person. Her skin, hands, clothes, and the objects buried with her were all perfectly preserved. Scans showed that her internal organs remained completely intact, and there were no signs of any bone injuries whatsoever. The most accepted explanation is that the maiden was placed in that chamber in a state of deep drowsiness and never managed to survive the extreme cold while she slept. Hair analysis revealed that in her final months of life, she had been given large amounts of coca leaves and chicha, a fermented corn drink, likely to keep her calm during the ritual and the climb up the mountain. Today, the maiden resides at the Museum of High Mountain Archaeology in Salta, Argentina, kept in special capsules with strict control of temperature, humidity, and oxygen. A tiny microscopic worm appeared in the Siberian ice of Russia, and it looked like nothing more than an ancient remnant stuck in the frozen ground. But when scientists thawed out the sample, the creature began to move. It was inside an ancient fossilized squirrel nest, buried nearly 40 meters deep in the permafrost, that layer of soil that stays frozen all year round. By dating seeds and plants preserved in the same block, researchers calculated that those worms had been there for about 46,000 years. And the explanation isn't magic. These animals entered a state of cryptobiosis, an extraordinary type of extreme pause in life. The body loses water, metabolism nearly shuts down, and the organism simply waits for better conditions to start functioning again. In this worm, scientists even found trehalose, a sugar that helps protect DNA and proteins, functioning as a natural antifreeze. After the studies, another fascinating detail emerged. They belonged to a species that hadn't been described yet, called Panagrolimus colimiensis. The original females lived only a short time after being thawed, but they managed to leave descendants in the lab because the species can reproduce without a male. Those offspring are still being studied today, a lineage that began long before any laboratory existed. Beneath the ice of Greenland, there was a massive ancient impact crater that nobody could clearly see from the surface. It wasn't a hidden mountain or an ordinary valley at all. This was a huge impact crater, buried under more than 900 meters of thick frozen ice. The confirmation didn't come until 2018, when researchers managed to get radar images that could penetrate the frozen layer and reveal the terrain far below. That's when the outline of the Hiawatha crater appeared in northwestern Greenland, an enormous circle roughly 31 kilometers in diameter. The size is truly impressive because you can imagine entire cities fitting inside it. But for a long time, the big question was something else entirely. When exactly did this massive impact happen? The answer came from tiny zircon crystals, which preserve signs of ultra-high temperatures. Radiometric dating showed that the impact occurred about 58 million years ago. In other words, this crater didn't form under the ice at all. It was born much earlier, when Greenland was a very different place from the white desert it is today. The asteroid, probably rich in iron, would have been about 1.5 kilometers in diameter and released enough energy to instantly melt rocks all across. The region at the moment of impact today, Hiawatha, is still there, buried under the frozen layer, invisible to anyone who passes overhead. But perfectly clear when radar penetrates through the ice and reveals the ancient hidden scar that's been there for millions of years. A French mountaineer was crossing the Glacier de Bossons on Mont Blanc when he spotted a metal box emerging from the ice. It wasn't trash left behind on the mountain. The box was stamped "Made in India" and had appeared because the ice was slowly melting in that region between France and Italy. Inside, there were small bags containing approximately 100 rough gemstones, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires. Everything pointed to this being from one of the Air India tragedies on Mont Blanc, the crash of the Malabar Princess in 1950, when 48 people didn't survive. rarest detail of this story came afterward. The mountaineer didn't try to hide the discovery. He kept his own identity a secret and handed everything over to the police in Bourg Saint-Maurice, France. From there, the authorities tried to locate the original owners or any heir. The search lasted years, involved international contacts, but nobody could prove ownership of the jewels. In 2021, after 8 years, the treasure valued at around 300,000 euros was split. Half went to the climber and the other half to the city of Chamonix, France. The city's portion ended up in the Crystal Museum as a historical piece from that patch of ice that still bears marks of ancient tragedies. Thomas Lowerding spent years looking at something almost everyone thinks is simple: ice. But at the University of Innsbruck in Austria, his team showed that frozen water can be far stranger than a cube straight from the freezer. Under different pressure and temperature, the same H2O changes its behavior. The atoms arrange themselves in a different way. And it was in this very specific corner of physics that Ice 19 appeared. It wasn't found in a glacier. This ice only exists in the lab, under extreme conditions. Temperatures near minus 170 degrees and enormous pressure, similar to what you might find inside planets like Uranus and Neptune. The difference lies in the atomic arrangement. In ordinary Earth ice, the hydrogens are more disordered. In Ice 19, they fall into their own order, forming much more rigid and unusual crystals. To confirm that this was indeed a new form of ice, scientists needed to see the structure from the inside. The breakthrough came when Tobias Gasser mixed a small amount of regular water with so-called heavy water, which is water with a heavier type of hydrogen, used in this kind of experiment. This made the ice organize faster and allowed precise measurements. The discovery was confirmed in 2021 and also helped us better understand other rare forms of ice. U.S. military aircraft vanished over Alaska in 1952, and the answer remained trapped in ice for decades. It was a Douglas C-124 Globemaster II, an enormous cargo plane from the United States Air Force. On November 2020, it crashed into Mount Gannett in Alaska with 52 people on board. Nobody survived that tragic crash. Soon after, an avalanche covered the fuselage and carried the wreckage deep into the Colony Glacier, where everything stayed frozen and completely out of reach for a long time. The discovery only came in 2012. Pilots from the Alaska National Guard were on a training flight when they spotted shiny metal pieces glinting on the glacier's surface, and they weren't even close to the original crash site. The ice itself had dragged the plane's remains about 19 kilometers, eventually revealing shattered parts of it 60 years later. From then on, teams returned to the site every single year in an operation called Operation Colony Glacier. The work was slow and extremely difficult because the glacier kept moving, breaking apart, and slowly exposing fragments over time. Through painstaking DNA testing, the remains found were identified one by one. On January 7, 2026, the U.S. Air Force announced the official identification of the last crew members still listed as missing. The plane never came back whole, but the families finally got closure. Walter Dreiss commanded a base that almost no one was supposed to know existed. In 1943, deep in the Russian Arctic, the German Navy set up a secret station on Alexandra Land within the Franz Josef Land archipelago. Its code name was Schatzgräber, which means treasure hunter, except there was no treasure there at all. What there was extreme cold, total isolation, and 10 men sending weather data to guide German ships and submarines during the Second World War. For decades, that base remained forgotten on that frozen terrain. When Russian researchers returned to the site, they found rotted wood, metal pieces, ammunition, clothing, meteorological equipment, and everyday objects, all perfectly preserved by the cold, looking as if the crew had left in a hurry without organizing a thing. In 1944, supplies became scarce, and the supply boats got trapped in the ice. To survive, the team hunted a polar bear. The meat was prepared unsafely, and nearly every single one of them caught a severe parasitic infection. The only man who didn't go through that was the base's medic, because he was a vegetarian and refused to eat. The evacuation turned into a desperate situation. Dreiss, the station's commander, collapsed during the rescue and had to be convinced to get on the plane. In the rush, the Germans left the outpost behind, along with a mine belt that would only be fully deactivated decades later. In 2016, more than 500 items were recovered from the ruins, frozen remains of a secret mission that ended abruptly in the middle of the Arctic. Jean-Michel Claverie was not just trying to scare people. The virologist from Aix-Marseille University wanted to answer a very concrete question. If something was buried for thousands of years in Siberia's ice, can it still become active again when the ice melts? The answer was unsettling. His team managed to reactivate giant viruses preserved in the Siberian permafrost for up to 48,500 years. Permafrost, as we've mentioned before, is soil that stays frozen for very long periods of time, like a natural freezer. These viruses earned the nickname zombie viruses, but the key detail is this. In the lab, they only infected amoebas, single-celled organisms, not people. Still, the experiment showed that ancient ice can hold microscopic life for an absurdly long time. The worrying point is that this natural freezer is now opening up. With rising temperatures, parts of the permafrost collapse and expose ancient carcasses, animal remains, and layers of soil that haven't seen the surface for thousands of years. And this has already moved beyond the realm of hypothesis. In 2016, on the Yamal Peninsula in Siberia, a heat wave is believed to have exposed a reindeer carcass contaminated with an anthrax-causing bacterium. The outbreak hit herds hard, and over 2,300 reindeer died. Dozens of nomadic herders were hospitalized. The real fear is not some movie-like virus emerging from the ice and taking over the world overnight. For it to become a major threat, it would have to survive, find humans, infect people, and then spread. But every new crater, mine, or city built in these frozen regions increases the chance of contact with something that has been locked away there for a very long time. When the ice of Lendbreen began to melt in the rugged mountains of Jotunheim in Norway, archaeologists realized that the mountain wasn't just losing frozen water. The objects found there revealed that people had crossed that path with horses, goods, clothing, tools, and everything they could carry between the valleys. From 2011 onward, the discoveries became even more intense. A wool tunic dating back nearly 1,700 years appeared. Then came leather shoes, harnesses, sled parts, wooden boxes, and items tied to fire and transportation. It wasn't simply old stuff emerging from the ice. It was precious fragments of daily life from peasants, merchants, and warriors, preserved there for centuries. But this preservation has a limit. When these items emerge from the ice and get exposed to heat, wind, and oxygen, they begin to deteriorate fast. That's why each melting season turns into a desperate race to collect whatever appears. The objects showcase the peak of the Viking era around the year 1000 and show that the route was eventually abandoned in the 14th century, between a period of brutal cold and the impact of the Black Death in Norway. Today, every new find at Lendbreen looks beautiful on video, but for archaeologists, it's a relentless race against time. The ice in Norway didn't just reveal a few ancient objects, it actually opened up the map of an entire route that had vanished from memory. Over in Lendebrin, there was a mountain pass used by Vikings, peasants, and merchants for centuries. It was a path connecting the inland to the coast. But with snow, ice, and time piling on top, it completely disappeared. When the ice began to recede, clues started appearing all along the trail. A horse bridle, pieces of leather, walking sticks, clothing, and even objects with runic inscriptions. And one find really caught everyone's attention. A wool tunic around 1,700 years old, practically intact. It's the oldest piece of clothing ever found in Norway. With each new item, it became clearer that this wasn't just the trail of a lost traveler, it was a genuinely busy route. The team from the Norwegian show Secrets of the Ice identified the pass back in 2011. Based on the findings, it was used between the years 300 and 1500. Then, with the cooling of the Little Ice Age and the impact of the Black Death on Norway, the path was abandoned and eventually forgotten, and the search didn't stop there. In 2021, researchers located the ruins of a lost Viking settlement, with 21 houses on the mountainside. It was probably a shelter for those crossing that region, but this discovery is racing against time. The same ice that preserved everything for centuries is now melting fast. Whatever appears now needs to be studied quickly before it disappears again. Don't forget to subscribe to watch more videos like this.